Welcome. I am Dr. Patrice Berry, licensed psychologist, and today we are going to be diving into the role of power, privilege, narcissism, addiction, and family dynamics in the Murdaugh trials. And I have really taken a look at the background information, the things that are publicly available. I have watched a lot of the court trials. I think we're on day 22. Today is February 24th. And everything I'm going to be talking about. So I cannot diagnose anyone. I am not providing a diagnosis, but I am just saying in general, how can these different dynamics, how can that impact a person's behavior, their family relationships? And at the end, I'd really like to give some tips because I think this trial has brought up, especially for people that have grown up in toxic family systems, this might have brought up some things. And I want to talk about some things that can help. I'm a licensed psychologist with over 15 years of clinical experience. And here on my channel, my goal is just to provide some education. Let's talk about these things. And anytime I'm commenting on a public scenario or a public situation, I am doing this for education only. And I haven't really seen anyone go in, especially on these specific topics, especially a licensed psychologist or a psychiatrist. And you all asked for this video. This is a phenomenal comment by Robin, who said, there has been so little commentary on the psychological/behavioral components at play in this trial, and that seems to be crucial to me. Robin, me too. I sure hope the prosecution has a psychologist they are consulting with, because I fear that his repentance, yes, the Alex repentance, especially with him testifying right now, is going to hit a soft spot with that particular jury. It seems a lot of people are struggling with how a man like him could his child, especially in such a violent way. The wife, maybe, but not his own flesh and blood. But I wonder if that's not the whole point. I do see a sense of regret over the shame he's brought to the Murdaugh name. He and Paul seem to share many of the same traits. I agree. And that is where some people have kind of thought that, does Alec have a little ADHD himself? And was he self-medicating? And I do think there are a lot of things. Once again, I can't diagnose him, but just based on the description of his behavior, we do know that Paul was diagnosed with ADHD. And I kind of wonder if maybe Alec might have had a touch of that as well. I just wonder if he saw himself in Paul, ADHD, substance abuse, risk-taking, and predicted that Paul was destined to a lifetime of further mishaps that would only bring more shame to the Murdaugh legacy. And I also think Paul was facing some real criminal time with the boat case that I know the family says they don't believe that he was driving the boat, but just based on the crime scene reenactments, and I did watch the Netflix series and the HBO series, and I don't know for sure, but everything seems to point that there might have been a cover-up with that case, and that he should have been treated as a potential suspect within that situation. But because of the family name, because of all those other things, I think they were able to get away with some things that normal people like you and me wouldn't have gotten away with. And with that conclusion, he justified ending Paul's life. Is it possible that Alec Murdaugh convinced himself that he was actually saving Paul from the despair of repeated failures and saving the family from the trouble that threatened their destiny, or even saving him from jail time, mercy of sorts? If so, could you also call that a most tragic display of projection? And we are going to get into projection, especially with somebody that has some narcissistic traits. Narcissists seem to often see their children as an extension of themselves. Could it be that he believed Paul would the traits in himself that he doesn't like? I know you can't diagnose, and I can't diagnose him, but can you share your thoughts on the psychopathology of a man with similar life experience who might be capable of such a thing? Yes, we are going to dive into those things today. As I'm talking, please be sure to share your comments. If you have additional questions, please let me know, and let's hop right in. So let's first start with the fact that narcissism is a personality trait characterized by an excessive and unrealistic sense of self-importance, a need for admiration, and a lack of empathy towards others. Individuals with narcissism often exhibit the following traits. I would also like to give a special note that these traits are on a spectrum, and somebody can have some narcissistic traits and not qualify for narcissistic personality disorder. There are very specific criteria to have that particular disorder. And there is a psychologist that I follow who also talks about being narcissistically defended, Dr. Joe Court. He talks about this on his different social media. And the difference between being a narcissist and being narcissistically defended is that sometimes the individual, when presented with conflict, that in their everyday life, they might not exhibit narcissistic traits, but in a conflict, they might display some traits or symptoms that come off as narcissism. And often individuals who are narcissistically defended were raised by individuals who were narcissistic themselves. So one of the first traits of an individual with narcissistic traits is a grandiosity. Narcissistic individuals have an inflated sense of self-importance and believe that they are superior to others. The difficult thing with this case is that the Murdaugh name did in and of itself carry a weight with it. There was some power and privilege. There were pictures of his, I think, grandfather or great-grandfather in the courtroom that he used to go to, that he did have some power and there was some privilege. Because often with a narcissist, there's this inflated sense of self that's not connected to reality. And that's what makes it a little bit more difficult for this case. But the thing that makes it appear that there may be some of those type of traits is the addiction. And I'm going to get into more of how narcissism and addiction, how that can be related. But the fact that Alec was not able to be Solicitor General because of his substance history, because of his substance abuse, and that was something that he wanted, and he probably thought he was entitled to. But it wasn't something that he was able to do. The fact that he supposedly carried the badge and kept the badge on his dashboard, and that somehow shielded him from certain consequences, or if he was pulled over, seeing that badge, that he thought he was entitled to and expected to be treated different than anyone else. Individuals with narcissistic traits have this excessive self-love. They are obsessed with themselves, their achievements, and constantly seek admiration and attention from others. And they do the same things with their children, and they often see themselves in their children. And we're going to get into that a little bit more. Number 3, there's often this lack of empathy, that individuals with narcissism are unable to recognize or understand the emotions of others and are often dismissive of the feelings of others. And when we think about how could somebody steal from their housekeeper's children, how could somebody do all of these things? And there might have been this emotional disconnect of, this is what I needed. I was taking care of me and my family, which is mind-blowing because I could never harm other people in that way of stealing their money, stealing from all of these other people. And the only reason why I'm saying it like this is because within Alec's own testimony lately, he has admitted to, yes, I did steal from those people. And I'll say it again, I think he is admitting these things so that the jury says he did admit to this. And so maybe he's telling the truth when asked about harming his family. There's also this sense of entitlement. Individuals with narcissism often believe that they are entitled to special treatment and privileges, and often expect others to cater to their every need, whim, and desire. And this is where that power of the family, because Alex saw his dad, Buster, do the exact same thing. And his dad, Buster, likely saw his grandfather. Like, there was this legacy of Murdaugh's run this. Like, we in the Low Country don't mess with this family. Like, there was this realistic sense of entitlement and power. And that could play into how somebody's personality formed. Can't diagnose, but And the last characteristic we'll cover related to narcissism is manipulation. Individuals with narcissism are skilled at manipulating others to get what they want. And often they use their charm, flattery, and even coercion to achieve their goals. And they're often very social. They get along with others. They're often well liked until you don't do what they want them to do. Like there can be this other side, the shift that happens if they don't see you as being on their side. And even when Alec was being interviewed or questioned by his own attorney, you could see him being almost a little defensive and almost a little short with some of the questioning. And I do think that he didn't think that's where the person either should have been going or that they shouldn't have been focusing on this, because an individual with narcissistic traits, now I do think Alec is a good attorney, but an individual with some narcissistic traits, they often think that they are the best in the room. They are the brightest. And why aren't people doing things the way that they want them to? Or why aren't you doing it the way I told you to do it? And I don't know what's happening, but that's what came to my mind in watching some of that testimony. And I wanted to take a look and talk about how narcissistic traits can impact behavior. And it really can be quite profound. Individuals with narcissistic traits often struggle to form healthy relationships with other people. There's often this excessive self-focus that can make it difficult for them to relate to or even empathize with others. They may also struggle with feelings of insecurity and inadequacy. And that's the narcissist's true secret, is that they are often incredibly insecure. That's somebody that truly has this ability. Like you wouldn't have to flaunt it. You wouldn't have to show it off. It's almost like a peacock putting up their colors, like, look at me. And it's really not necessary. But for that individual, because their sense of self is so fragile and so based on how others perceive them, and even them perceiving themselves as being the best in the room, that can really cause them to constantly seek validation, and they might actually feel quite empty and unfulfilled inside. And this can sometimes lead them to engage in risky or impulsive behaviors as they seek to satisfy their own desires and fill those empty spaces without regard for the consequences to themselves or others. They can also be aggressive or hostile when they feel their sense of superiority or entitlement is being threatened. And I think you've seen that on the stand when Alec is kind of lashing back, or I mentioned it as it seemed like a rage to me. Like there was this deep-seated anger and things that come out as he's talking about certain topics. And even in some of the interviews or some of the past recordings that have been played, I think of the Gloria Satterfield 911 call when he snapped back at the 911 caller, like, can you stop asking her questions? But the lady's literally doing her job. And they always, because this, my research says that they often know, like they always struggle to accept criticism or failure gracefully. Like it's not going to happen. If they fail or are criticized, they take that as a personal offense, and they really take that personally. And often that's where that defensiveness comes in. And you hear about gaslighting, and that's where the person might turn it back on the other person. Like, how dare you? Because I was trying to confront an individual with narcissism about their behavior, and somehow now they're turning it on me and saying that I'm the one that's the narcissist, or I'm the one that is out of hand or out of line. And that's a really common technique that's used. I have some content on co-parenting with individuals with difficult personality traits, and often not giving them a reaction, because often an individual with narcissistic traits, they thrive off being in control and feeling like I caused this, I made you feel this way, versus, okay, like, you do you, I'm gonna do like, but you don't have the power over my emotions. You don't have control over my behavior. I'm not going to engage in this power struggle, because engaging with them, engaging in the argument, engaging in the power struggle just feeds it and makes it way worse. And then also ignoring it, because they call it gray rock. So often trying to be the gray rock where you're not responding or reacting, individuals might escalate in that situation too. And that's where I follow some different individuals that give really great tips on how to handle if you are in a relationship with a toxic person. But overall, narcissistic traits can have a negative impact on an individual's relationships, personal well-being, and overall quality of life. It is important for individuals with this to seek professional help. And in my experience, now there is an individual on TikTok, I forget his handle, but he talks about how he's been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, and he gives different tips for people like to identify the traits. And he's supposedly done a lot of his own work to improve and work on this. I see it the most with like children, and there might be a parent that's exhibiting some of these traits, or I see it in couples work. I don't do a ton of couples work, but where a partner is that comes in and they are not open to any feedback, and there's just a lot of these signs and traits there. Let's talk about how narcissism can impact parenting. So it can have such a significant impact on an individual's ability to parent, because individuals with narcissistic traits, they often struggle to provide the emotional support and empathy that children need in order to develop a strong sense of self and well-being. And here are some specific ways that narcissism can impact parenting. And so, number one, there is this lack of emotional attunement. And attuning to my child is being able to see, it's that empathy and being able to connect with my child's emotion, and to not immediately think like they're doing this to me, or to not take things that my child does personally. Or I think it can be a bit toxic to think that my child is an extension of me, because it makes us enmeshed and it makes us one when my child is their own individual. And I think it's important for my child to develop their own sense of self that includes, but like it doesn't have to be exclusively based on me. And narcissistic parents can struggle to attune to their children's emotional needs and excessively focus on themselves. And it can really be difficult for them to recognize and respond to their children's emotions. And individuals with these types of traits can vary from either overprotection or neglect. And so they might swing between these different things and struggle to find this balance of providing the support and guidance that their child needs to find their own autonomy and independence. And some of those things, it's like Alec is just casually mentioning that Paul has lost boats, plural boats, like, and he's just losing weapons, and like there are all these things are just being misplaced, and we're all just like, oh well, that's Paul. But we're not like, there's no talk of any treatment or support. Like nobody is identifying that, hey, this is a problem, like we need to address this. And I don't know, so I don't know if Paul did ever get any support for his for his diagnoses. I don't know what happened, but I know that if my child was struggling in that way, I would have some boundaries. There would be some things in place to make sure that my child is being safe. And the family was aware that Paul would drink in excess. And there was even a nickname for when he had too much to drink. I think they called it Timmy or something like that. There would be this other side that would kind of come out, and nobody really confronted that. And I do think that because Paul was so aware of his dad's addiction, and Alec Murdaugh is on the stand today talking about how Paul because Maggie found some pills and then talked to Paul about it, and Paul warned his dad. And we are going to get into family dynamics because that enables those behaviors. And yeah, but we will get to that, I promise. But the fact that Paul was put in these places of either they're swooping in and saving him from consequences of his actions. And so if he had a speeding ticket. I watched the Netflix series, and his ex-girlfriend talked about how they were in a car accident, and how the family swooped right in and took care of everything. And Paul knew to call, and it wasn't even to call his dad, that his granddad was the one with even more power, I think, than his dad, and that he was going to step in. I wonder if the health condition of his father played a role in just his emotional state at that time. And I do not know, did he do what he's charged with doing? I don't know. And I don't even think the state has done a great job. They didn't have a lot, but part of that was because of that power and privilege, where the officers showing up on the scene didn't even secure the crime scene. They didn't ask people to leave. They didn't execute the search warrant on the different areas that he really was given a lot of leeway. Because I've even heard that there were family members that would follow the different agents around. And if I was an agent, like, that would be kind of anxiety provoking. Like, what other case are family members like watching the execution of a search warrant and possibly even like questioning? And I haven't heard that they were doing this, but if I was just, an agent of the state, that would be just so odd, especially knowing some of the alleged reputation that the family had. And back to parenting. Number 3, there can be this inconsistent discipline, and that individuals with narcissism, they often struggle to be consistent and provide appropriate discipline for their children, either overreacting to their behaviors or possibly underreacting, as their own emotions and needs may take priority over their children's behavior. There can also be this lack of empathy that we've discussed, struggling to empathize with their experiences and viewing their children's emotions and needs as secondary to their own. And then lastly, there can be this emotional manipulation, where they may use this to control their children or manipulating them to meet their own needs. And so it really can have an impact on a child's emotional and psychological development. There is a phenomenal book called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents: How to Heal from Distant, Rejecting, or Self-Involved Parents. I heard about this on TikTok first, of course, but a lot of people have found this resource to be incredibly helpful. Additionally, children of narcissistic parents may often struggle with low self-esteem. They might have difficulty forming healthy relationships and may even develop their own narcissistic traits as a coping mechanism. And it is, once again, important for individuals with those traits to seek some support so that they can strengthen their emotional bond with their children. Let's talk a little bit about the connection between narcissism and addiction, because there is a connection between the two. Individuals with narcissistic traits are more likely to develop addiction than individuals without those traits, because it's often a way to self-medicate. Individuals with narcissistic traits may use drugs or alcohol as a way to cope with feelings of inadequacy or low self-esteem. And those substances might actually enhance their feelings of grandiosity and control. Individuals with narcissistic traits can often be very impulsive, and substance use and abuse can be a form of impulsive behavior. It can often start with that. And it's also a type of risk-taking behavior as well, that individuals with narcissistic traits are more likely to engage in risky behaviors, including drug and alcohol use. And they might feel that they're demonstrating bravery or superiority over others, because today Alec was talking about how many pills that he was using a day and going through the difference of everything. And there was almost this this is how much I could tolerate. And I had built and developed this tolerance. And so sometimes it can be like, oh, I can handle this much. And I'm not saying that's what he was doing, but I'm saying that's what individuals can definitely do. And then there can often be co-occurring mental health disorders. So individuals with narcissism often have co-occurring anxiety or depression that can make them at an increased risk for addiction. In the first question, I was specifically asked to explain parental projection and narcissism. And parental projection is the unconscious process by which parents project their own unacknowledged feelings, beliefs, and desires onto their children. And this can occur in any family, but it's particularly pronounced in individuals where one or both parents have narcissistic traits. And it is once again tied to that feeling of grandiosity, like my kids are so great. In this situation, I do think that Buster was the child that was the golden child, the one, and we will get into family dynamics, but the child that had some of the positive projection. And then it seemed that Paul was the one that had more of the negative projection. Narcissistic parents may project their own acknowledged emotions like anger, fear, shame onto their children, making it difficult for their children to express their own emotions freely. There can also be expectations, and so that the parent is projecting their own expectations onto their child, expecting them to follow in their footsteps, or that's the way that you get their approval is by doing what they want you to do, and that you're meeting their expectations. There can also be this need for admiration from the children. And so often children, it's normal for a child to seek validation from their child. It is odd for parents to want the child to like see them in a certain way or needing that admiration and attention from your child. That's placing your child in this parentified role because that's something that the parent should be giving to the child. And so expecting them to perform or achieve in ways that reflect well on the parent. And then narcissistic parents can project their own feelings of inadequacy or unworthiness on their children, leading to unrealistic expectations or really harsh criticism. And so it can lead to confusion, anxiety, a lack of self-awareness. For children of narcissistic parents, they often struggle with forming their own sense of self and expressing their own emotions freely. I thought it was important to talk about because love. Alec Murdaugh is using the word love a lot, but how an individual with narcissistic traits view love and how the rest of us view love is very different. And so, can a narcissist love their children? And I do believe that narcissistic parents are capable of feeling love for their children, but their ability to express and demonstrate that love can be limited or distorted by their traits, and that they may view their children as extensions of themselves rather as individuals with their own needs and desires. And so if that child isn't doing what they want them to do, or if they're not fitting into their mold, or if they're not making them look good, or if all of these things are happening, that can impact how that love is expressed. And I wonder because Paul seems to be the one that knew a lot about his father's addiction. And Alec today talked about how his close family members, but just Maggie, Paul, and Buster, that they had all seen him detox. And that's where an individual who is addicted to opioids, and it is intense because he describes the flu-like symptoms, like it is a process when the body is detoxing, and then just taking one pill will make those symptoms go away. And that's why addiction is really, really hard. And there are medications that can be extremely helpful. And anyone that is struggling with the opioid addiction, making sure that they have Narcan available, making sure, because individuals in that seeking state where they're looking for more and more, that they are at an increased risk to possibly overdose. And so I say all of that just to say that these things should really be taken seriously, because today testimony came that I guess after the boat case that Alec had agreed to go into rehab or something. Narcissistic parents often prioritize their own needs, and so they might neglect their child's emotional needs and criticize or blame their children for their own shortcomings. So the parent is the one who actually failed, but they might project it on the child that the child is the one that has the problem. And that's where I think the role of the scapegoat, and I'm trying to wait to get to the family dynamics, but it's so hard because I do think that that plays a significant role in situations like this. And it's common within families where there is addiction, where there is significant mental health, where there is this toxic dynamics, for there to be these dysfunctional family roles. And I will link, because I did a whole series on dysfunctional family systems, dysfunctional family roles. and the scapegoat, the one that carries the family's problems, the one where it's like, and I think Paul was that scapegoat, and legit had his concerns. But I think he carried more than what you would ever want your child to carry without the adults acknowledging, hey, I need to work on me. I need to take care of these things. This is on me. That it's difficult for an individual that has narcissistic traits to do that. And so I do think that individuals with narcissism may feel genuine love and affection for their children, but their own emotional needs and expectations might cloud their ability to express that love in a healthy and supportive way. And so now for the part that I've been really excited to talk about is those family dynamics, that scapegoat and golden child, because in looking at this case, it really does seem like people are falling into certain family roles that can also be an enabler. And at times, a family member might go in and out of these different roles. And here is a picture of the different family roles, but the ones we're going to focus on the most today are going to be the scapegoat and that golden child. And with the enabling, I think codependence plays into that. And so we'll end talking about codependence. In many families, individuals unconsciously adapt to certain roles that serve and maintain the family's dynamics and balance. And this is where I talk about that dysfunctional families can function in their own way, because this family that everybody else thought was so successful and so just like other people might have envied this particular family, but there were some things happening under the surface that appear to be quite toxic, that appear to be very problematic. And the scapegoat is typically the family member who is blamed for problems in the family, either real or imagined. And they may be singled out and criticized or even punished when things have gone wrong in the family. And sometimes, if too much pressure is being put on a particular family member, and within parent-child relationships, I often see that as the parents start to have conflict, the scapegoat might start to escalate their behaviors because it makes the parents stop focusing on their issues and they come together to focus on the child that's having the issues. And sometimes that might be, if it's in a funny way, that might be the family clown or the mascot, the one that's like trying to make the family laugh. But the scapegoat is often the one where they're like, oh, you're the problem. It's not us. And then anytime there's a scapegoat, there's often normally a golden child. And the golden child is typically the family member who's favored by the parents, and often at the expense of other family members. They might receive special treatment or privileges or attention from the parents and be viewed as the perfect child. And the existence of the golden child is the way for, because maybe there's some dysfunction between the parents, but the golden child says, how could we be doing anything wrong? And we have, look at this child, look at how well they're doing, like, and that somehow that's a reflection on them, when really that child might be functioning in spite of their environment, in spite of what the family has done. That often the golden child is the one that maybe gets out and might be able to escape the dysfunction, but sometimes they then create some of their own dysfunction as they leave. Because I've sometimes seen the golden child switch. Like once they leave the house, sometimes those family dynamics shift a little and they might struggle because their sense of self, their sense of worth is all based on, can I just be perfect? And nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes and we try. Not like these huge, because the things that have happened, the things that have been alleged in the Murdaugh trial, and just all of the other deaths and things that have been somehow allegedly linked to this family, it is. But you can clearly see that Paul was likely the scapegoat and that Buster was likely that golden child, the one who was going to go to law school. And it hasn't come up on the stand, I don't think, that Buster supposedly got kicked out of his law school for plagiarism. And And they're looking into some old stuff, and we'll see what happens with those trials and everything. But lastly, talking about the role that codependence can play in some of these behaviors and in keeping these family systems going. And one of the biggest things is enabling, that when there's this codependence, that we are all relying on each other, we're all relying on these secrets to stay in this space, that can often make addiction way worse. And so that's where it's really important that individuals, that in a toxic family environment, there need to be some healthy boundaries, because they were talking about how in the middle of trials, Alec would answer his phone. Like, I could not, I have testified in court sometimes, or I've been in court with, I used to do home-based counseling, and I would go to court with clients. I've never seen an attorney like, hello, like right in front of the judge, like right in the middle of their, whatever they're saying, answer the phone and carry on as though that's just normal. Like, and I do think this whole system enabled some of the things that came. And I'll say it again, that I do think that Alec was surprised that, first of all, that he didn't get bail, and then that it does look like he's going to be held accountable, at least for the financial crimes. I don't know what this jury is going to do, because the case keeps focusing so much on the financial, on all of these other things. And there's so much circumstantial evidence with the actual crime that he's charged with, that he's on trial for right now. And it'll be interesting to see how he explains that lapse of time, now that he's admitted that he was at the kennels. And I guess today he said something to the effect of, or maybe it was yesterday, he said something to the effect of, I had to get out of there after he got the chicken out of Bubba's mouth. But I think there's more to this case. It's just a feeling. It's not a clinical opinion. This is just me as a person. There just seems to be more. And as I'm watching, there seems to be all these different things: power, privilege, addiction, codependence, and narcissistic traits. Like, there seem to be some things that are lining up and coming up. I can't diagnose. I'm not Dr. Spiegel. I can't watch someone behavior and diagnose them. But from where I'm sitting and with the knowledge that I have about psychology, these are just some of the thoughts that came up. And lastly, I would like to share one of the comments from Maggie, who said that she stumbled on my video and subscribed, and that Alec's testimony has given her the unhealthiest feeling and really triggered some things, and that she was really glad that we were going to dive more into narcissistic personality disorder. And so this is what I put together in response to those two comments. If you have questions, I cannot give specific advice. I can't talk about whether I think someone is innocent or guilty, because none of us know the truth. Only the people truly involved in this know exactly what happened. But I do like giving my commentary. And I do hope, as Robin talked about, that they are consulting with a psychologist. I was hoping for a forensic expert, for there to be a psychologist, because if they had a psychologist that was testifying, I would stream that. I would stream my reaction to that. And because I missed that I didn't stream some of the things with the Depp v. Heard. Like, that was the last trial that had me this like, oh my gosh, this is what's going on. Because all of the rest of us can't even imagine this type of treatment and this just sense of entitlement, which is why I think people go to, gosh, there has to be some diagnosis that explains this. And honestly, this might just be a pattern in the Low Country of this prominent family that just expected that everything would go their way and there would not be consequences for their behavior, that nobody would dare file charges, that nobody would dare look at these things, or that there were enough friends, there were enough people in place that would shield them from any consequences. And it's been interesting to watch. If you like this content, please consider subscribing. I appreciate you all. Hope you have a great rest of your day.